FMVue is a tool to help FileMaker developers create awesome web viewer apps. So if you feel like you're not getting the most out of the web viewer because it seems time-consuming or difficult to learn, then you should definitely try this. When you open FMVue for the first time, go to Settings and put in an OpenAI secret key. Also, put in your email address so you can use the diff checker API. You don't need to register, just put in your email and you can generate 250 code diffs per month for free. Lastly, if you're on a Mac, you'll want to make sure the web inspector is enabled. Click to copy the command, paste it in terminal, and hit enter to run it. So what can you build with FMVue? Some of the apps that I've built with FMVue are right here in FMVue. There's this breadcrumbs widget up at the very top, very simple, pretty much impossible to build in FileMaker without the web viewer because it responds to clicks, and each of these clickable areas resizes to fit the content. On the left, there's a code editor, that's a web viewer. And over here in the Comm tab, there's a pop-up menu that's dynamically generated from JSON data. And lastly, we have the AI assistant, where you describe what you want to build or ask questions about the project. Here's one of the more sophisticated apps I've built with FMVue. Down the left, I have a list of PDF and image files. There's a large preview in the center. And I can navigate pages with the keyboard or these arrows. I can also zoom in and out. I can open up thumbnails on the left. I can add comments, tags, and flags to individual pages. And I can filter by those tags and flags. So if I want to see all of the pages relevant to the site plan, just select that from the menu. And I see all of the pages that are tagged site plan from all files. These icons indicate this page has a comment or a tag, and if I add a flag, that will be reflected there as well. Now that you know what FMVue can do, let's build a sample app. I'm going to call it Value Slider. And for the project, let's just put YouTube. This is just to help organize our apps into groups, and you can change these later. Click Create, and then let's open up the AI assistant. And let's try this. Build a slider to set a value between 0 and 100. When the user slides the slider, run a FileMaker script, JS set value, and pass in the value under the value key. The animation means the response is coming in. Right now it's the code that's coming in, and once that's finished, the message will stream. Okay, let's see what we got. The value is defaulting to 0, and okay, I immediately see a problem. You can see up here in the top that it's calling a FileMaker script called JS set value, and 39 means that the script was called 39 times during those few seconds while I was dragging the slider. So let's ask it to only run the script after I release the slider. Okay, let's check it now. Drag the slider, so no script is currently running, and then as soon as I make my selection, it runs the FileMaker script JS set value. Great. There's other ways I could have done that. I could have asked it to debounce so that it would run less frequently, but it would still run continuously. But this is great for now. Now, I also want this to send in an initial value when the web viewer loads, because I probably already have a value in FileMaker. And I also might want to make this more customizable, so let's make it so that we can push in a minimum and maximum value as well. I want to pass in a value when the app loads, and I also want to pass in a minimum and maximum. Okay, let's make sure this still works. So I can see it's set the initial value to 25, and I can drag it down from 10 and up to 90. And when I release, it still runs the script JS set value. So let's look a bit about how FMVue is managing this. So if I look under the FM tab, I can see two JSON objects. The first one describes the FileMaker scripts that are called by the web app, or can be called by the web app. And the second object is the methods that can be called in the web app by FileMaker. So we have the first is JS value slider load. So this is a FileMaker script that we run when the app is ready to receive data. And actually, it has a sample parameter here, but this actually would not receive a parameter. So the AI has made a mistake. I'm going to just remove that because that's irrelevant. But there is a callback indicated, which basically just tells us that when the web viewer calls this FileMaker script, it's expecting that FileMaker script is going to call back a result. And here is the setup method that the web viewer is expecting FileMaker to call back on, and here's the sample parameter. And this is actually used to run the FMVue simulation, so to speak. So if I change this to minimum 0 and maximum 10 and default 2, and I refresh the web viewer, I'll now see that the value is 2, and it goes from 0 until 10. And lastly, we also see the JS set value script is indicated here, and an example of a value that it would receive is value 0. So just to recap, I'll refresh this web viewer. You can see that when it loads, FileMaker script called JS value slider load. And then when I drag and I select a value, it runs the FileMaker script JS set value. And these are not real scripts in FMVue. FMVue is intercepting them based on these names. So it's finding these in the source code, replacing them with a test script so that it can receive those calls, and then it can call back if that's indicated using information in the @methods object. And all of these calls are logged under the Comm tab. So we can see a couple minutes ago we received from the web viewer called JS value slider load. I can go under here and I can see that it just passed in the script name. And this is just something that we need in order to make FMVue handle all of this interaction. So the script name is always going to be part of the payload. And in this case, there's nothing else. So FileMaker responds by calling the setup method in FMVue, and we can see that it sent the minimum, the maximum, and the value, and it just pulled those from the sample parameter for that method. And then after I selected the value, 8 seconds later, the web viewer called the FileMaker script JS set value, and we can see that it passed in value 5, which is the value I selected. Also under this tab, we have the ability to run methods. So we can click here and select. In this case, there's just the setup method. This is the methods that are exposed to FileMaker, and this should include all of the methods that are under the methods object under the FM tab. So if I click setup, it'll automatically pull in that sample parameter, and I can change it to say 15 and 10, and initial value let's say 10, and if I run, that will update the slider. So now the slider accepts values between 10 and 15, and as you saw, it started on the value 10. So let's look at how all of this works in the source code. Here we have the input slider. So this is most of our app right here. And for the minimum and maximum, we're referencing a reactive variable in Vue called model.min and model.max. And the value itself is model.value. And then we have @change equals onSliderChange. So onSliderChange is a method in Vue that will run anytime the slider changes. So under the HTML for the page, we have the script tag, and this is where the VueJS options object is. So the first thing usually is the data object, and it's in this case we have model as a convention in FMVue. Model is where we put data that comes from FileMaker, and there's some default information here, but this isn't actually needed because we're always calling that FileMaker script that's going to get the values anyways. But we can actually probably take these out and that would be fine. Let's actually try it. When I make manual changes, it's going to ask me if I want to create a new version just so that I can keep track of changes, and it allows me to go back to the version that the AI created. So I'm going to go ahead and do that. So it ran the script, and it's now doing 0 to 10, which is how it's currently configured here. So it made no difference that that I removed the model from here. Then we have methods. So the setup method is the method that FileMaker calls when the web viewer loads. The name setup is just a convention for FMVue. And also relevant down here, we'll just skip over to this mounted section. So mounted runs when the web viewer loads. The first thing we want to do is make sure that the setup method is exposed so that FileMaker can call it. So we say window.setup equals this.setup. And then we call the FileMaker script JS value slider load to let us know that we're ready to receive the setup information. So the setup information is here. That'll pull it out of the object that it receives as the script parameter and put it into the page. And then the other method here is onSliderChange, where it runs the FileMaker script JS set value and it passes in the value, this.model.value. Now up here at the top we see version 5 of 5, and I can click on this and it opens up the complete history of changes in this file. And we can see that version 2, 3, and 4 were created by the AI, and version 5 was created by me manually. And if you recall, the first version, which is actually version 2, 1 is just the initial state. The first version had an issue where it was calling the FileMaker script dozens of times per, every couple seconds. And so if we wanted to have an understanding of what needed to change in order to correct that, I can click on diff to compare the version I'm currently on, which is version 5, with the version I select here. And I can see that what used to be input equals onSliderChange is now change equals onSliderChange. So that's a small difference that affects when the onSliderChange runs. I can see other differences that we've implemented since that version as well. I can also go to old versions. I can click here. So now I'm on version 2 of 5, and I can see again the script running like crazy. And I can go to any of the other versions as well. I have the ability to delete the most recent version. Sometimes the AI just makes a huge mistake, and rather than trying to undo the mistake, it makes more sense to just go back and run. You can even run the same request again, and it'll very likely do it differently. But you don't have to delete it. You can go back a version, and then you can continue from here. And effectively, that creates a branch. So you can see that version 4 originated from version 3. 3 originated from version 2. If I created another version from version 3, it would be above here, and it would say 3 to 6, for example. I can also create my own manual version anytime I want based on any previous version. So just click the version I want to work on, click new version based on version 3, and then I can make my changes. Let's talk about deployment. So when you're ready to deploy your app to FileMaker, go to the Deploy tab. Depending on your app, there can be between 1 and 3 options here. In this case, we just have escaped FileMaker calculation, which can be enabled or disabled. So if it's enabled, I'll click Copy to Clipboard, and I'm just going to use VS Code to show what this looks like. This is an escaped FileMaker calculation that is ready to paste into FileMaker. And I just noticed that it's including this this substitution here, but this actually won't do anything because of the way we're doing our integration. I'll explain that in just a moment. If I turn off escaped FileMaker calculation, copy to clipboard. You can see that it's not escaped at all, so this would be something I could install into a field or a text object in FileMaker. Now we talked about how the app calls a FileMaker script when it's ready to receive its initial data. In FMVue, we call this the script integration type. This is the default in FMVue, and it works really well in a lot of circumstances. But with such a simple app as this, you might just want to merge the initial setup data right into the code, so you don't need a load script. In FMVue, we call this the merge integration type, and you can change integration types right here with the AI assistant. So I'm just going to say change to the merge method. I think it'll figure that out. Great, it's converted the app to use the merge method for initial data loading and remove the setup method and the script call from mounted. So remember, here in FM we used to have sample data under this sample parameter here. But what FMVue has done is it's now moved it to the merge tab. This is where the sample data now goes. I did make a mistake here. I started this from version 3, so that's why we don't have the minimum and maximum initial values. Whoops. I'm going to fix that. So I'm going to delete and back to version 5 and change to the merge method. Great. Switch the app to use the merge integration method. Initial data are merged into the app's model before initialization. So remember, we used to have, and actually it's still present, the setup method here with its sample param. This is actually no longer needed because now the initial data is under the merge tab. Okay? So this will actually be merged into the app when it loads. If I click refresh, we'll see that it no longer runs a script when the app loads. So I can say minimum 10, max 10, and initial value 5. And as soon as I save that change, the app reloads. No script is called. Of course, it still needs to call a script when the value is changed. So how does this affect deployment? So if I choose escaped FileMaker calculation, copy to clipboard, and paste, we now see that it's running a substitution here. So it's written a JSON set element here. I could delete this if I'm referring to a field or a variable in my script. Otherwise, I can just edit the values, and you can see that there's a substitute here, which if we go to the bottom, it's replacing this data model in square brackets with that JSON object. And if we go up and we look under model is now essentially a merge field. If I turn that off, copy to clipboard, and paste that in, we'll see that we will have to do that ourselves. So data model will be here in square brackets, and we'll have to do a substitution in order to make that work. We also now have a new option under the Deploy tab called Replace Data Model with Sample Data. So if I turn that on and copy to clipboard and paste, we now see that it's put the sample data directly into the app. So this would only be useful probably if you don't want the ability to customize that information when the app loads. And lastly, if I choose both of these options, escaped FileMaker calculation and replace data model with the actual sample data, copy to clipboard, now I can see that we have an escaped FileMaker calculation, and it just has the data right here. So there's no longer any substitution command. Speaking of the Merge tab, there's also a subtab here called Other Merge Data. And this allows you to put in images or other large blocks of data that you want to use in your page, but that you don't want sent up to the AI every time, because the AI has to rewrite the entire page each time, and if you have too much data in the page, it can take a long time. So, for example, if I want to put a logo in my app, I can just drag the file to drop file here, and it'll automatically convert this to base64 data URL, and it'll give it a name. I can change that if I want. And so now under source, I can add an image. So let's go here and do image src equals, and for this, yes, we'll do a new version. Image src equals, use your square brackets to indicate that this is a merge data, and I believe it was blowfish.png, and that should be all we need. And there it is. It's loading my logo as base64. So when I deploy that, there's an option, there's now the third option for deployment, merge the merge data into the document. So here I'm going to turn these off, copy to clipboard. So now there's a large amount of data here. This is probably no longer going to be able to be pasted as a FileMaker calculation. There are limits there. So you'll want to deploy this through a FileMaker field or a text object. But I also have the option to turn this off so that I'm not merging this data into the document. Copy to clipboard. And in this case, it's going to be left as the merge field name with the square brackets. So that means you have to do that substitution now to insert the data URL in this case, which might be useful if you're using the same resource in many different apps, and then you can simply perform a substitution to get that into any app. You can build apps in FMVue entirely with the AI. You never really need to touch code, but it can be really useful if you know what's going on, so that you can if you want to. So let's have a little bit of a look, go a little deeper into VueJS within FMVue. So we have a few examples here. The first one here is data binding example. So it says type something, hello world, and you can see as I type, the value down here changes at the same time. And this is really, really easy to do in Vue using Vue's reactivity. So let's first look at the HTML for this. We have the input field is here, and there's an attribute here called vModel, and the value is message. And so message is the name of the reactive Vue variable that we are attaching to this or binding to this input field. And then down here it says you typed, and all we have here is curly braces with message inside. Really, really simple. And then all we have down in the Vue object related to this is here, message with a default value of nothing. And that's it. That's all we need to make this work. So having message declared here is what makes it a reactive Vue variable. And I can now put it anywhere on the screen using those curly braces, or bind it to an input field with vModel. Okay, let's look at the next example, list rendering and event handling. So add new item. I could say first item, add. Second item, add. Okay, so how does this work? Well, let's start at the bottom since we're already here. There are two reactive variables declared for this to work. One is items, and it's initially just an empty array. And then we have new item, which is just an empty string. And then we also have a add item and remove item method here in the method section. Add item just trims the item, and then using .push adds item to the items array. And whenever we're referring to a Vue reactive variable or another method from within this object, we use this for that. So this dot items refers to this array, and then push adds item to that, which an item itself came from this dot new item dot trim. So it trimmed the value I entered in the field, which is comes from new item. And then remove item just uses dot splice to remove the item that was passed in through index from the array. So let's look at the HTML for that. List rendering. So we have input field here with a placeholder add new item, and vModel is new item. So new item is that reactive variable that was declared initially as an empty string. And then there's a button called add, and this button is disabled when there is no new item. So you can see that it's sort of light colored, and clicking it does nothing. And as soon as I type, it becomes enabled, it becomes darker. And when I click it, it runs the method add item, which we looked at just a moment ago. And then we have our items listed here. So how does that work? We have an unordered list, and then we actually only have one list item. Oh, actually we do have two. But let's just look at this one for now. And there's an attribute here called v-4, and v-4 basically means that we want to iterate through an array. Basically it creates a loop so that this list item will be rendered for each item in the array. And so for each item in items, there will be a list item, and here it is, item. So this array is simply strings. If the array was, if it was an array of objects, then we might see item dot name, for example. But I don't want to do that in this case. And then we have this trash can next to each item, remove item. So this passes in the index, which is a zero-based index that we obtained when we iterated through the array. And so when we click that delete button, it runs remove item, and it passes in the index. There's another list item here, and this one has a VIF. VIF, and then there's a JavaScript expression here. Items.length is exactly equal to 0. So if I delete both of these items, that item renders, and it shows no items added. Lastly, we have conditional rendering. There's a button here that says show info, so I can show and hide very simply. Let's look at how that works. There's our button. And when we click the button, we're simply setting show info to the inverse of show info. So if show info was true, it'll be changed to false. If it was false, it'll be changed to true. We could also have called a method that did the same thing, but in this case it's a simple one line of JavaScript, so we don't need to call a method. And then for the content, we're using curly braces to, again, use a JavaScript expression. This is called a ternary operator, I believe. So show info, question mark. If show info is true, it'll output this. If show info is false, it'll output this, and then it'll output info. So you can see when I click the button, it toggles between show and hide. And then down here we have the div that appears when show info is true, and that's done with vif equals show info. So down here in the view object, we have show info. It has an initial default value of false, and there's not going to be any methods or anything else related to this feature. And lastly, we have a computed property example. Enter a number, I'll put 5, and the squared value of 25 immediately appears. Quick look at the HTML. We have an input field, the type is number, and it's bound to the reactive view variable number. And this number just ensures that it's always cast as a number, which I don't think would matter in this situation ever, but it's a good practice anyway. And then below that we have a paragraph with squared value, and then the value is squared in curly braces. So we're going to look down here and we're going to look for squared, and it's actually not going to be here under the data object. Instead, it's going to be down here under computed. So these are called computed properties. It's very similar to an unsorted calculation in the FileMaker world. So this can be referred to in the same ways that the reactive variables are, but it obviously can't be edited if it were bound to an input field. It is a calculation. So here is the expression that is returned, and this is reactive, so anytime anything it references is changed, this will be changed automatically, just like an unsorted calculation. Couple more things you might want to know about FMVue. So when the web viewer calls a FileMaker script, it runs this script, test script. And this script handles a variety of things like logging to the Comm tab, showing the toast notification, and running a callback to the web viewer if applicable. But you can also add your own logic if you need to call an API, for example. So I've been using FMVue to create reports, and I want to have a button that creates a PDF output of that report. And so I've added special logic here that says if script name equals receive report HTML, it's going to call a script that I've created in FMVue that calls a web service that can convert HTML into a PDF. And then the PDF comes back down, and I put that into a container field. You can use this to add whatever logic you want in order to thoroughly test your app. The other script that you might want to be aware of is the AI assistant script. So this is where all of the prompting is that affects how the AI assistant behaves. So you can open up this here, insert text, and you can read all of the prompting that we send to the AI every time you send a message. And you can customize this however you want. So for example, FMVue is designed to use Vue and Tailwind and a number of other libraries. If you wanted to change that behavior entirely or slightly, you can simply modify the prompting to make it work however you want. I hope that FMVue works for you, and I can't wait to see what you build.